Okay, today, guys, we have a short answer section, which covers lots of different things. It covers usage, vocabulary, punctuation, reading comprehension. And then we have a bit of an expanded vocabulary section. And I just want to welcome the new people. And we do sometimes do participation, guys, especially on the short answers. So I'm going to give you guys a chance to answer, and then I'll proceed. Okay, we'll take the first question. In the early 1800s, the Cherokee scholar Sequoyah created the first script or writing system for an indigenous language in the United States. Because it represented the sounds of spoken Cherokee so accurately, his script was easy to learn and thus quickly achieved blank use, colon. By 1830, comma, over 90% of the Cherokee people could read and write it. Which choice completes the text with the most logical and precise word or phrase? And I will take any answers from the audience here. Does anyone have an answer?
A.
A is correct. So it was so easy to learn, right? Quickly achieved widespread use. And then it goes on to explain what that means. Okay, because when you have,
Excuse me, are we recording?
yeah,
Oh, okay.
widespread use. And then you see after the colon, basically you're explaining exactly what widespread use means. So by 1830, over 90% of the Cherokee people could read and write it. That's widespread use. So the correct answer is A. Okay, number two, when Mexican-American archaeologist Zelia Maria Magdalena Nuttall published her 1886 research paper on sculptures found at the ancient indigenous city of Teotihuacan in present-day Mexico. Other researchers readily blanked her work as groundbreaking, semicolon. This recognition stemmed from her convincing demonstration that the sculptures were much older than had previously been thought. So she came up with a breakthrough, changed their understanding of the history because her dates were very much older than what they had thought. So what word do you think is the best word for this particular blank space? Anybody?
A, acknowledged.
Yes, you are correct. Good job. So the ancient Egypt, President, other research readily acknowledged her work as groundbreaking. In other words, they accepted the fact that her work was very important and changed the conception. And then you see the semicolon. Now you're going to have another sentence connected that's related to the idea. This recognition stemmed from her convincing demonstration that the sculptures were much older, to everyone's surprise, than had previously been thought. Excellent. Okay. Question 3. Like other tribal nations, the Muskogee Creek Nation is self-governing. Its National Council generates laws regulating aspects of community life, such as land use and healthcare, while the principal chief and cabinet officials blank those laws by devising policies and administering services in accordance with them. So which choice do you think is best for this blank? Anybody? Okay, well, the answer here is implement. So the National Council generates the laws. In other words, they sign them into law or vote them into law, but somebody has to implement them, put them into action. And that is done by the principal chief and the cabinet officials. They implement those laws by devising policies and administering services in accordance with those laws. So the correct answer here is implement. The difference between passing a law and actually implementing the law, okay? Meaning making use of the law. Okay, good. Question 4, in the indigenous intercropping system known as the Three Sisters, maize, squash, and beans form an blank web of relations. Colon, now we're going to explain what relations are. Maize provides a structure on which the bean vines grow. The squash vines cover the soil, discouraging competition from weeds. And the beans aid their two sisters by enriching the soil with essential nitrogen. So I want you to see the colon here. All right, again, a web of relations, colon. This whole section is an explanation of what the web of relations is. And that's why you have a colon there, okay? But guess what? Between each object, okay, that they list, you have a semicolon. And we've learned in the past, right, that you can use semicolons to separate a list of objects, especially when one of those objects has an internal comma. So if one of the objects has an internal comma, what you do is you separate each object by a semicolon, and if there are internal commas within each object, that's fine. So that follows basically the punctuation you should be using. So these three crops, maize, which is a type of corn, squash, which you know what that is, it's a gourd, and then beans, okay, they have this relationship, okay? They form a blank web of relations. What do you think a good word would be here? Indecipherable, ornamental, obscure, or intricate?
D.
Did you say D?
Yes.
You are correct. An intricate web of relations. So it's fairly complicated, right? Because structure is provided by one, covering the soil to discourage weeds is provided by another, and the third one essentially is a legume. So what it does is it fixes nitrogen and puts it into the soil. Okay, and so it's an intricate web of relations. None of the other choices make any sense. Good job. Okay, number 5. The artisans of the Igun Oramwan Guild in Benin City, Nigeria, typically blank the bronze and brass casting techniques that have been passed down through their families since the 13th century. But they don't strictly observe every tradition. For example, guild members now use air conditioning motors instead of handheld bellows to help heat their forges. So, but, okay, when you see the word but, okay, that means it has to contrast with what came before, okay? They typically blank the bronze and brass casting techniques, but they don't strictly observe every tradition. So you'd expect that this would typically follow, typically use, right? But not everything. So which one of these choices do you think would be ideal? Experiment with, adhere to, improve on, or grapple with? Okay, so B is the right answer, adhere to. To adhere is to stick to something. So it says they typically adhere to or stick with the bronze casting techniques that have been passed down since the 13th century, but they don't strictly observe every tradition because they're using modern electric motors instead of the handheld bellows. Okay, so again, this is a contrast, right? They typically do this, but this is the exception. Okay, so the right answer is B, adhere to. Okay, 6. Some economic historians blank that late 19th and early 20th century households in the United States experienced an economy of scale when it came to food purchases. They assumed that large households spent less on food per person than did small households. Economist Trevin Logan showed, however, that a close look at the available data disproves this supposition. So when you suppose something, you assume something, right? So Trevin is saying that the assumption that they made is not correct based on the data that he's looking at, okay? And their assumption was if there's more people in the household, it's easier to buy food more cheaply and share it among a large number than it is among a small number. That was their assumption. So some economic historians blank, surmised, contrived, questioned, regretted. What word here is a synonym of assumed?
A.
Yes, surmised. To surmise something is to basically assume it without any real evidence. And of course, this guy, Trevin Logan, kind of disproves it. And intuitively, it makes sense, right? It's easier to cook for 4 people than it is to cook for 1 person. It seems to make sense, but actually, the data does not support it. Okay, so the right answer is to surmise. They surmised, or they assumed. Okay, number 7. The work of Kiowa painter T.C. Cannon derives its power in part from the tension among his blank influences. Classic European portraiture with its realistic treatment of faces, the American pop art movement with its vivid colors, and flat style the intertribal painting style that rejects the effect of depth typically achieved through shading and perspective. Now, again, here's that structure. Okay, what are the influences? Colon. This is telling you what the influences are. It's explicating this word, right? And then you have a list. Each object is separated by a semicolon. You see that? This is one of the ways that we use semicolons, right? Here's another semicolon, okay? But the reason we're using semicolons is because some of the objects have an internal comma. And it would get too confusing if you separated objects by commas and then had commas within objects. So whenever you have an object in a list that has a comma internally, you always separate the objects with the semicolon, okay? So you've got these different influences, right? One is European portraiture, another one is American pop art, and the third one is Indian flat style, and they're all very different. So it derives its power in part from the tension, meaning they're not alike, right? There's tension, something's different among his blank influences. Would that be complementary, unknown, disparate, or interchangeable? Which word do you think is most appropriate? Anybody? Okay. C, disparate. Some things that are disparate are very different from each other. They're not alike. And of course, these three different influences are disparate. And so there's tension among them because each of them preaches a different style. And he's trying to combine them all. And that's what creates the interest, the power, the disparate influences that are affecting his work. Okay, good. So the right answer there is C. 8, new and interesting research conducted by Suleiman A. Al-Swidan and Moth Al-Haj is inspired by their observation that though there have been many studies of the effect of high altitude on blood chemistry, there is a blank studies of the effect on blood chemistry of living in locations below sea level, such as the California towns of Salton City and Sealy. So we've done a lot of research on mountains and people living on mountains and how it affects their blood. But no one has done a whole lot of research on how the people living below sea level, how their blood chemistries are affected. So basically, there is a blank of studies on the effect of blood chemistry, a quarrel about, a paucity of, a profusion of, a verisimilitude in. What do you think is the right answer here?
B.
You are correct. So we're contrasting many with a paucity. Many studies versus a paucity of studies, okay? Meaning not a lot. And there's the contrast that you should pick up, and that's why this is the right answer, B. Good job. 9, the following text is from Sarah Orne Jewett's 1899 short story, Martha's Lady. Martha is employed by Miss Pine as a maid, so Martha's the maid. Miss Pine sat by the window watching, in her best dress, looking stately and calm. She seldom went out now, and it was almost time for the carriage. Martha was just coming in from the garden with the strawberries and with more flowers in her apron. It was a bright, cool evening in June. The golden robins sang in the elms, and the sun was going down behind the apple trees at the foot of the garden. The beautiful old house stood wide open to the long-expected guest. So they're waiting for the carriage, and obviously the carriage, you know, this occurred back in 1899, so it's a horse-drawn carriage. And the carriage is carrying the long-expected guest. And of course, the lady of the house, Miss Pine, is sitting by the window waiting. And Martha the maid has just gone out to collect flowers and strawberries. Which choice best states the main purpose of the text? A, to convey the worries brought about by a new guest. B, to describe how the characters have changed over time. C, to contrast the activity indoors with the stillness outside. D, to depict the setting as the characters await a visitor's arrival. What do you think is the right answer here?
D.
D is right. So basically, it's a picture. It's a word picture of what the setting is, with Miss Pine sitting by the window, looking out at the robins singing in the trees, sun setting. And then Martha busy in the garden, coming in with her flowers and strawberries. This is basically a word picture. And so that's why you're depicting a setting. And it's all taking place at the same time. You're not seeing characters changing over time. You're not seeing any worries. They're kind of anticipating, this is a good thing, right? They're happy they get company coming. And there's no contrast with indoor and outdoor because it's all part of the same setting. Okay, that it creates a visual image using words. So the right answer is D. Okay, good job. All right, number 10. Astronomers are confident that the star Betelgeuse will eventually consume all the helium in its core and explode in a supernova. They are much less confident, however, about when this will happen, since that depends on internal characteristics of Betelgeuse that are largely unknown. So they can't see inside the star. Astrophysicist Serafina El-Badri Nance and colleagues recently investigated whether acoustic waves in the star could be used to determine internal stellar states, but concluded that this method could not sufficiently reveal Betelgeuse's internal characteristics to allow its evolutionary state to be firmly fixed. So they know it's going to explode into a supernova. They don't know when. They tried to use acoustic waves to look inside the star to get more information, but it didn't work. So let's see. Which choice best describes the function of the second sentence in the overall structure? They are much less confident, however, about when this will happen, since that depends on internal characteristics of Betelgeuse that are largely unknown. It explains how the work of Nance and colleagues was received by others. Well, that's clearly wrong. It presents a central finding reported by Nance and colleagues. No, it doesn't. This sentence doesn't do that. That happens later on. It identifies a problem that Nance and colleagues attempted to solve, but did not. What do you think about that answer?
It's
C.
correct.
It is correct. Yeah. So it identifies a problem. They don't know what's inside the star. So they can't predict when it's going to blow up. And they tried to find out, but they couldn't. The acoustic waves didn't work. And then D, it describes a serious limitation of the method used by Nance and colleagues. No, it doesn't describe the method at all. Okay, so that sentence tells you what the problem is and what they tried to do to solve it. The following text is from Jane Austen's 1811 novel, Sense and Sensibility. Eleanor lives with her younger sisters and her mother, Mrs. Dashwood. Eleanor, this eldest daughter, whose advice was so effectual, possessed a strength of understanding and coolness of judgment, which qualified her, though only 19, to be the counselor of her mother, and enabled her frequently to counteract, to the advantage of them all, that eagerness of mind in Mrs. Dashwood, which must generally have led to imprudence. She had an excellent heart. Her disposition was affectionate, and her feelings were strong, but she knew how to govern them. It was a knowledge which her mother had yet to learn, and which one of her sisters had resolved never to be taught. So what is she saying here? She's saying Mrs. Dashwood is a little bit impulsive. Sometimes she reacts without thinking. And the sisters, one of the sisters is the same way. But Eleanor, who was only 19, seems to be wise. She seems to have control over her emotions, and she knows how to govern her emotions and make wise choices. So she's a counselor, an advisor to her mother, Mrs. Dashwood. Okay. So according to the text, which is true about Eleanor? Eleanor often argues with her mother, but fails to change her mind. It doesn't say that. Eleanor can be overly sensitive with regard to family. Doesn't say that. Eleanor thinks her mother is a bad role model. Doesn't say that. Eleanor is remarkably mature for her age. Yes. She's only 19, but yet she has more control over her emotions than her mom, and she acts as a counselor. She acts as a fountain of wisdom. So she's remarkably mature. So the right answer to 11 is D. Okay, let's move on. 12. Believing that living in an impractical space can heighten awareness and even improve health, conceptual artists Madeline Jins and Shusaku Arakawa designed an apartment building in Japan to be more fanciful than functional. Okay, look at that. More fanciful than functional. A kitchen counter is chest high on one side and knee high on the other. A ceiling has a door to nowhere. The effect is disorienting but invigorating. After 4 years there, filmmaker Nobu Yamaoka reported significant health benefits. So it's kind of a bizarre apartment, right? It's got a door in the ceiling. The kitchen counter is too high or too low. Apparently, living in this impractical space, this bizarre space, the theory is that it somehow improves your health. And this guy, Nobu, says that he thought he had health benefits from it. Okay. Which choice states the main idea of the text? Although inhabiting a home surrounded by fanciful features, such as those designed by Jins and Arakawa, can be rejuvenating, it is unsustainable. It's certainly sustainable because he lived there for 4 years. Designing disorienting spaces like those in the Jins and Arakawa building is the most effective way to create a physically stimulating environment. It doesn't say the most effective way. Don't add things that aren't there. As a filmmaker, Yamaoka has long supported the designs of conceptual artists such as Jins and Arakawa. It doesn't say that. It just says that he lived there for 4 years and had health benefits. So I'm thinking D has to be right. Although impractical, the design of the apartment building by Jins and Arakawa may improve the well-being of the building's residents. Yeah, that's the main idea. They're saying that it can improve your health, and then this guy Nobu is testifying that he felt great health benefits from it. So they're offering the possibility of health benefits. So D is the right answer. 13, in a research paper, a student criticizes some historians of modern African politics, claiming that they have evaluated Patrice Lumumba, the first prime minister of what is now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, primarily as a symbol rather than in terms of his actions. So that's very important right there. Primarily as a symbol rather than in terms of his actions. And this is the criticism of the student about what the historians are promoting. Okay, which quotation from a work by a historian would best illustrate the student's claim? Now remember, whatever the quote is, this is the thing that the student is criticizing. Lumumba is a difficult figure to evaluate due to the starkly conflicting opinions he inspired during his life. Well, that's not what the student is criticizing. B, the available information makes it clear that Lumumba's political beliefs and values were largely consistent throughout his career. That's not what the student is criticizing. C, Lumumba's practical accomplishments can be passed over quickly. It is mainly as the personification of Congolese independence that he warrants scholarly attention. As the personification of Congolese, as a symbol of independence. This is what the student is criticizing. That they're saying they're emphasizing the symbolic nature of his leadership rather than his actions, what he actually does. And then D, many questions remain about Lumumba's ultimate vision for an independent Congo. Without new evidence coming to light, these questions are likely to remain unanswered. Again, the student is not criticizing that. He's criticizing this kind of statement that a historian would make. So the right answer here is C. 13 is C. All right. Now we've got a little graph interpretation. Percentage of Ondo State small-scale farmers who are female by main crop grown. So in North Ondo, in Central Ondo, and in South Ondo, we have cereals, root crops, and non-root vegetables, okay? And remember, this is all percentage of female. So for North Ondo, cereal crops, 30% of the farmers are female. For root crops, about 15, 16%. And for non-root vegetables, 58% of the farmers are female. And the same thing applies for Central and South. So let's read this. Geographer Adebayo Oluwole Eludoyin and his colleagues surveyed small-scale farmers in 3 locations in Ondo State, Nigeria, which has mountainous terrain in the north, an urbanized center, and coastal terrain in the south. To learn more about their practices, like the types of crops they mainly cultivate. In some regions, female farmers were found to be especially prominent in the cultivation of specific types of crops, and even constituted the majority of farmers who cultivated those crops. For instance, which choice most effectively uses data from the graph to complete the example? So we're going to go through all 4 of them, okay? Most of the farmers who mainly cultivated cereals And most of the farmers who mainly cultivated non-root vegetables in South Ondo were women. Well, here's cereals, only 30% are women. So we know right away that's wrong because 30% is not most. So we get rid of A. B, more women in Central Ondo mainly cultivated root crops than mainly cultivated cereals. Okay, Central Ondo root crops are lower than cereals. So it's the opposite of what B says. Okay, C, most of the farmers who mainly cultivated non-root vegetables in North and South Ondo were women. So non-root vegetables, over 50%, that's most in the South. In the North, non-root vegetables, 58%, that's most as well. So both are most, so C is correct. D, a relatively equal portion of women across the 3 regions of Ondo mainly cultivated cereals. So you can see it's not equal. Right? It goes up and then down. So there's no equality there. So that's clearly wrong. So the only correct answer is C. So 14 is C. All right, 15. Given that stars and planets initially formed from the same gas and dust in space, some astronomers have posited that host stars such as the sun and their planets, such as those in our solar system, are composed of the same materials, with the planets containing equal or smaller quantities of the materials that make up the host star. This idea is also supported by evidence that rocky planets in our solar system are composed of some of the same materials as the sun. Which finding, if true, would most directly weaken the astronomer's claim? Okay, weaken the astronomer's claim. Most stars are made of hydrogen and helium, but when cooled, they are revealed to contain small amounts of iron and silicate. A nearby host star is observed to contain the same proportion of hydrogen and helium as that of the sun. Evidence emerges that the amount of iron in some rocky planets is considerably higher than the amount in their host star. The method for determining the composition of rocky planets is discovered to be less effective when used to analyze other kinds of planets. Which one do you think is the correct answer here?
C.
You are absolutely correct. Because it says here equal or smaller quantities of the materials. And here it says the amount of iron in the planets is considerably more. Not less, but more. So C is the right answer. Good work. Okay, in the 20th century, ethnographers made a concerted effort to collect Mexican-American folklore, but they did not always agree about that folklore's origins. Scholars such as Aurelio Espinosa claimed that Mexican-American folklore derived largely from the folklore of Spain. As we know, Spain settled Mexico, which ruled Mexico and what is now the southwestern United States from the 16th to the early 19th centuries. Scholars such as Americo Paredes, by contrast, argued that while some Spanish influence is undeniable, Mexican-American folklore is mainly the product of the ongoing interactions of various cultures in Mexico and the United States. So one guy is saying that the folklore originated in Mexico, the other one's saying it came from Spain. Which finding, if true, would most directly support Paredes' argument? Paredes is the one that says that most of the culture is locally created in Mexico. All right, let's take a look at the choices. A, the folklore that the ethnographers collected included several songs written in the form of a decima, a type of poem originating in Spain. Well, that doesn't support Paredes, that supports the first guy. B, much of the folklore that the ethnographers collected had similar elements from region to region. Well, that would imply that it's mostly Spanish, right? Because Spain basically conquered and settled all of that. If it was growing up locally, there would be differences between regions. C, most of the folklore that the ethnographers collected was previously unknown to scholars. That doesn't necessarily mean one thing or the other. Most of the folklore the ethnographers collected consisted of corridos, ballads about history and social life of a clearly recent origin. And remember, Spain was there from 1600 to the early 19th century, 200 years earlier. So this is recent origin. So which one do you think is the right answer here?
D.
D is correct, right? Because if it's of recent origin, then it's probably not due to Spanish influence, right? And the recent origin would support Paredes. It says that it grew up locally, that the folklore was created locally. So D is the right answer. 17, in the early 19th century, some Euro-American farmers in the northeastern United States used agricultural techniques developed by the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois people, centuries earlier. But it seems that few of those farmers had actually seen Haudenosaunee farms firsthand. Barring the possibility of several farmers of the same era independently developing techniques that the Haudenosaunee people had already invented, these facts most strongly suggest that. So the facts are very simple. The Iroquois had used these farming techniques. Along came the Euro-American farmers, and suddenly they're using the same techniques. Many of them are. So it seems that they've been influenced by the Iroquois, but they never met the Iroquois, right? So there must have been an intermediary, right? And let's see what the choices are. Strongly suggests that those farmers learned the techniques from other people who were more directly influenced by Haudenosaunee practice. Those other people would be the intermediaries, right? So that A is clearly makes sense, okay? The crops typically cultivated by Euro-American farmers in the northeastern United States were not well suited. No, if they weren't suited to Iroquois farming, then the techniques would not have been followed. Iroquois farming techniques were widely used in regions outside the Northeast. No, that doesn't support the idea because the Iroquois were in the Northeast. Okay. D, Euro-American farmers only began to recognize the benefits of Iroquois farming techniques late in the 19th century. That doesn't support it either because it should have happened earlier. So basically, the only right answer here is A. So somebody who knew the Iroquois learned their techniques and then shared it with the Europeans. Okay. In the northeastern US. So A is the correct answer. If some artifacts recovered from excavations of the settlement of Kulu Kata in modern Ghana date from the 13th century CE, that may lend credence to claims that the settlement was founded before or around that time. There is other evidence, however, strongly supporting a 14th century CE founding date for Kulu Kata. If both the artifact dates and the 14th century CE founding date are correct, that would imply what? CE means Christian era. So it used to be AD, Anno Domino, the year of our Lord. But essentially, it means after the year 0. Okay? So some of the artifacts are from the 13th century, right? But there's evidence that this particular town was founded in the 14th century. So what does that imply? Artifacts from the 14th century are more commonly recovered than artifacts from the 13th century. No, it doesn't imply. It doesn't say that at all, and it doesn't imply it. The artifacts originated elsewhere and eventually reached Kulu Kata through trade or migration. Yeah. If the town did not exist in the 13th century, and the artifacts are from the 13th century, then they had to be transported after they were made, after the founding of Kulu Kata. So B makes perfect sense, okay? The artifacts predated the town. Kulu Kata was founded by people from a different region than had been assumed. That's irrelevant. Excavations at Kulu Kata may have inadvertently damaged artifacts. That's irrelevant. Right? So the only right answer is B. If the artifacts were there first, they had to be brought to the town after the town was founded. Okay, good job. 19. A team of biologists led by Jae-Hoon Jung, Antonio D. Barbosa, and Stephanie Houghton investigated the mechanism that allows Arabidopsis thaliana, thalecrest plants to accelerate flowering at high temperatures. They replaced the protein ELF3 in the plants with a similar protein found in another species, stiff brome, that unlike A. thaliana, displays no acceleration in flowering with increased temperature. A comparison of unmodified A. thaliana plants with the altered plants showed no difference in flowering at 22 degrees Celsius, but at a warmer temperature, 27 degrees Celsius, the unmodified plants exhibited accelerated flowering while the altered ones did not, which suggests what? A, temperature sensitive accelerated flowering is unique to A. thaliana. But Well, I'll read them all, then you guys tell me what you think. Athaliana increases ELF3 production as temperatures rise. ELF3 enables athaliana to respond to increased temperatures. Temperatures of at least 22 degrees Celsius are required for athaliana to flower. Okay, let's go back over this because this is complicated. They replaced ELF3 with a similar protein, okay, from a plant that does not flower more at high temperatures. So ELF3 is replaced, right? Athalia plants, altered plants showed no difference in flowering when it got hot, but the unmodified plants showed flowering. So that means that ELF3 must be necessary in order for this flowering with warming to occur. Because when you get rid of ELF3, when you replace it with a different protein, the altered plants do not flower more at higher temperature. But with ELF3 in the plant, they do flower more. So which choice do you think is correct? Anybody?
C.
C, ELF3 enables athaliana to respond to increased temperature. Without ELF3, it can't respond by flowering more. So it needs ELF3 because when they took it out, it didn't show any response to increased temperature. So C is the right answer. 20, a member of the Cherokee Nation, Mary Golder-Ross, is renowned for her contributions to NASA's Planetary Flight Handbook, which blank detailed mathematical guidance for missions to Mars and Venus. Which choice completes the text or conforms to the conventions of standard English? This is a grammar question. They're looking for a tense. Okay. A member of the Cherokee Nation is renowned for her contributions. Okay. Which blank detailed mathematical guidance provided, having provided, to provide, providing. Which one do you think is the correct form of this verb?
A.
Exactly, provided. The other three are not, it's not an ing form, it's not an infinitive form, and it's not a past thing that stopped. Okay, so provided is the only correct answer here. Okay, guys, good job. All righty, let's move on here to 21. Typically, underlines, scribbles, and notes left in the margins by a former owner lower a book's blank. When the former owner is a famous poet like Walt Whitman, such markings known as marginalia can be a gold mine to literary scholars. So basically, if you're a nobody and you put notes in your book, you devalue your book. But if you happen to be a famous poet or author and you put notes in the book becomes very valuable based on your fame. So we need a contrast here, okay? It typically lowers the book's value. And the contrast comes with the word but. We must separate that with a comma. Okay? So the only right answer here is A. So let's read that sentence. Typically, underlined scribbles and notes left in the margins by a former owner lower a book's value, comma, but when the former owner is a famous poet like Walt Whitman, such markings known as marginalia can be a gold mine to literary scholars. So A is the correct answer. You need this contrasting word showing the difference between an unknown person who writes and a famous person who writes. You need the comma. So none of these others are correct. Okay, 22. After the United Kingdom began rolling out taxes equivalent to a few cents on single-use plastic grocery bags in 2011, plastic bag consumption decreased by up to 90 blank. Taxes are subject to what economists call the rebound effect. As the change became normalized, plastic bag use started to creep back up. So when you first put the tax on, everybody stops buying the bags. Then as they get used to the fact that they cost money, they start buying them again gradually. Okay. And so there's a connecting phrase here which needs to be chosen. What do you think the correct choice is here? Anybody?
C.
C is the right answer here. And the reason is you need to start a new sentence or you get a run-on sentence. So let's read the first sentence. After the United Kingdom began rolling out taxes equivalent to a few cents on single-use plastic grocery bags in 2011, comma, plastic bag consumption decreased by up to 90%, period. That's one sentence. Now we begin a new sentence. Such taxes are subject to what economists call the rebound effect. Okay, so you don't want to continue a sentence when there's a new idea. So to end the sentence with percent, period, and start a new sentence is the correct way to do this. So the right answer here is C. 23, as British scientist Peter Wibberley has observed, the Earth is not a very good timekeeper. Earth's slightly irregular rotation rate means that measurements of time must be periodically adjusted. Specifically, an extra leap second, the 86,401st second of the day, is blank time based on the planet's rotation lags a full 9/10 of a second behind the time kept by precise atomic clocks. So the atomic clocks are actually more accurate than looking at the Earth's rotation in terms of keeping time. They have to add a second every now and then in order to keep the Earth's rotation consistent with the atomic clock. Okay, so we need a connecting phrase here. And we have choices. Now remember, the words are all the same. All we're looking at is the punctuation. Okay, so do we need any punctuation at all? D is a choice without punctuation. The other three have forms of punctuation. So if you read this, specifically an extra leap second is added whenever time based on the planet's rotation lags a full 9/10 of a second. Is added whenever. Is added comma whenever? No, there's no reason for a pause there. Is added semicolon whenever? No. Is added period and then a new sentence whenever? No. You're breaking up the thought. Is added whenever? Yeah. You don't need any punctuation. D is the right answer. Okay? Because it flows perfectly. It doesn't require any punctuation. So the right answer is D. All right, 24. Bengali author Toru Dutz, A Sheaf Gleaned in French Fields, 1876, a volume of English translations of French poems. Blank scholars' understanding of the transnational and multilingual context in which Dutz lived and worked. Which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English? Okay, so the verb is enhance. We now need to know basically what tense to use. What verb tense to use. So author, a volume of English translations of French poems, did something to scholars' understanding of the multilingual context in which Dutch lived and worked. So what do you think the right answer?
A.
Why do you say that? You're right. Because it's a volume, it's singular. That's why you can't say have. It has to be has. It has to be past tense. And obviously it's something that's already happened because their understanding has changed. And this is something that, of course, he's written it previously. So it's all happening in the past. So are enhancing is in the present? No. Have enhanced is plural? No. Enhance is present? No. Has enhanced is the right answer. A is correct. Good job. All right, guys, we're done with that section. Now what we're going to do is we're going to stop share and go to vocabulary. And I think the vocabulary tonight is pretty fun. I always enjoy the vocabulary section. And this is where we, of course, welcome participation. We like it. And the first word we have is devise. What does it mean to devise something? Anybody?
To plan or invent.
That is correct. To plan or invent by careful thought. To create a system or a plan or method. To devise something. Okay, good. 2, guild. What is a guild?
A medieval association of craftsmen.
Yes, it is. It's a medieval association of craftsmen or artisans or merchants, people that were not royalty. So in medieval times, if you were a king or a duke or an earl, you had a lot of power. And the guilds were formed to counteract the power of the royalty. Okay? because if they banded together, they had more influence. All right. And nowadays, a guild could be any association of people coming together with a mutual interest. Okay, in the present world. But the guilds in medieval time were originally developed in order so that merchants and artisans and craftsmen who didn't have royal blood could still have their voices heard. Good. Okay, 3, forge. What does forge mean?
To make something?
Yeah, it's to shape or make a metal object. You heat the metal so it becomes more compliant, more pliable, and then you hammer it and you shape it the way a blacksmith would make horseshoes. That's forge. The other meaning of forge is to forge a document. What does it mean when you forge a document?
You copy it.
Yeah, it's a forgery. It's not real. It's a fake copy. So you never want to be guilty of forging a document. Okay, good. Grapple. What does it mean to grapple?
Like to hold? I think.
Yes, it implies that you're like close combat without weapons. Grappling is like when two people grapple, they're kind of wrestling really close with each other, grabbing each other. But the other definition is to grapple with a math problem, to struggle with it. He was grappling with his trigonometry problem because it was difficult. Okay, so there's two meanings there. Surmise, we talked about surmise. What does it mean when you surmise something? Well, it means basically you suppose that it's true, but you have no evidence. You're kind of making an assumption just based on your instincts. So you're surmising something. You're not proving it. Good. Okay. To contrive. What is it to contrive? Anybody? So when you contrive something, you're bringing about something which you're manipulating, and usually it involves not being totally honest. There's something artificial about it. And this is what they call a contrivance. Her tears rolling down her cheek as a reaction to her date canceling the evening's dinner. Her tears were contrived. She really didn't feel bad about it. She didn't like her date, didn't really want to go. But she made a show like she was upset about it. So that's a contrivance when you contrive something, creating an impression that isn't real. Good. Okay, what does disparate mean? We talked a little bit about disparate. What are the two things that are disparate? What's their relationship if they're disparate? Okay, it
There
means
is no
basically,
relationship.
yeah, they're totally unlike each other. They can't really even be compared. They're so different. So that's what it means to be disparate. Yeah, like the disparate techniques of that artist. Paucity. We talked about paucity. What does that mean? Paucity, anybody? So basically it means the presence of something in a very insufficient, small, scarce quantity. Let's say there was a paucity of food for the campers who were in the wilderness. They didn't have enough. So there was a paucity. And the opposite of that is profusion. So what does profusion mean? A profusion of food. Yeah, a profusion of food means an abundance. There's a whole lot of it. So you want to contrast a paucity of food, not enough, with a profusion of food, plenty, more than plenty. Paucity versus profusion, the kind of opposite. Good. Verisimilitude. What does verisimilitude mean? See, vera, truth, similar to the truth, right? Verisimilitude is the appearance of being true or real. So you might want, and it's not an insult. It's not like you're saying that somebody's fake. So what I would say would be like something like when you go to Disney World to the haunted house, the three-dimensional apparitions, holograms, create a verisimilitude of a haunted house. So it really feels like a haunted house when you go to the haunted house at Disney World. And that's what verisimilitude, it's not a put down, it means it's kind of good. Or the actor achieved verisimilitude of anger with his wonderful performance on stage. It makes you think it's real. Good. And it comes from the word veritas, which means truth, and similar, which means the same as. Okay. Acoustic, what does acoustic mean?
Something to do with sound and hearing.
Absolutely right. It's related to the sound or the sense of hearing, like an acoustic guitar, acoustic tiles, that help block sound out. So it clearly relates to sound. Okay, to posit something, that there's no E on that. Take the E off. The verb is to posit something. When you put something forth, you're positing it as if it's a fact, okay? So he posited that the anti-cancer medication would be very toxic to the patient. So you're putting it forth as a truth. Good. And what's an ethnographer? What do they do for a living? What kind of a scientist is an ethnographer?
They study individual cultures?
Yeah, that's right. They just study the customs and features of individual tribes, cultures, peoples. Absolutely right. Very good job. Okay, now we're doing 3 words for etymology. First word we're doing is paucity. And I want you to know that Latin and Greek come from the Indo-European language, Proto-Indo-European. All of the Western languages come from this common language called Proto-Indo-European, which existed in the Urals, part of Eastern Russia, really, today. And then they kind of evolved into Greek and Latin, and then into the Romance languages and Germanic languages and so on. So when you look at paucity, okay, it comes from paucitus in Latin. Paucitus in Latin means fewness or scarcity. But the PAU, the PAU, is from an older language, which is Indo-European. And that PAU in Indo-European, Proto-Indo-European, means few or little. So here's an example of a Latin word that came from an older language called Proto-Indo-European and eventually led to the English word paucity. So you're talking thousands of years going back in terms of language development, etymology. Okay, the next one is acoustic. Let's look at the word acoustic, okay? It's from the Greek acoustikos, which means pertaining to hearing. But it actually comes from Proto-Indo-European, because the kus part, the root in Proto-Indo-European, meant to hear. So here's an example where there's a Greek word, acoustikos, which came from an older language, Proto-European, Proto-Indo-European, the root of ku, right, which was kus, or to hear. And now in English, many, many thousands of years later, we have acoustic. Again, the etymology goes back to Greek, and then it goes back even further to what we call Proto-Indo-European, which is a common ancestor of Greek and Latin. Okay, and then the final one is verisimilitude, which we discussed briefly, but verum in Latin means true. And that's where you get the beginning here. And similis means resembling in Latin, right? So what other words can you think of that use the VER, meaning true? What other English words? Anybody? What words? Say it again.
Versatile.
Versatile. No, I'm not sure about that one. I was thinking of words like verdict, like when the jury comes up with a verdict, they are speaking truth. Dict is to speak or to say, and there is truth. So the verdict of the jury is to speak truth. Another word would be verify, verify, to show that something is true. You verify, you make sure that it's real, verify. And then what is the saying of what's the motto of the Harvard University? Yeah, every university has a motto. They use Latin, usually it's in Latin. What is the motto of Harvard University? Does anyone know? The motto is Veritas, 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 which means truth. So if you ever see the letterhead of Harvard University, you'll see underneath it says Veritas, truth. That's it. That's their motto. And again, that VER is the root, which means true or truth. Okay? Okay, guys. Well, I want to just highlight what we talked about. So a lot of times we follow etymology backwards from English to, for example, French or to Old English, right? And then we go back even further to either Latin or to Greek, which are very influential, right, in modern English. But tonight we went even further back in the etymologic chain of language development to the Proto-Indo-European language, which was a common ancestor of many European languages today, and a common ancestor of both ancient Greek and ancient Latin. And it originated, Proto-Europeans, they think it originated in the eastern part of Russia, in Georgia, that area there. And then it spread from there. So this is kind of a fascinating idea that, it takes you all the way back to when languages first started, when people first started speaking. And that's probably hundreds of thousands of years ago. They've actually traced the first language, so to speak, to East Africa. And they are referred to as the click languages, because apparently, based on, I'm not sure what evidence they have, the speaker would use a clicking sound, almost like a Morse code. And that was the beginning of communication by sound through language. It went beyond what animals are capable of. Okay? Okay, guys, we're all through. Thank you so much. Have a great week. We'll see you next Tuesday. Get straight A's in everything you do. All right.